This is the Systems Innovation Organizations Hub. My colleague and co-host is also here, which is Tripura. And the team has as well Sanjana and John. And welcome Al Walker, our speaker for today. He is sharing with us his wisdom around the viable systems model and a little bit more. So, welcome, Al, and thanks for your generosity for sharing your wisdom with us. We're looking forward to an exciting session where we want to let Al present his knowledge. Al is a freelancer. He knows how to apply this, and so it's not only about theory, it's also about diving into the practice. He brought us a real example that he's going to walk us through. And yes, he comes with a knowledge which is much broader than just that methodology. He will introduce it accordingly. He will describe it more deeply, go through the practice, and at the very end, he's also going to share some of the affordable ways where we could learn more, read more, and watch one or the other video around that methodology. So if we are interested in diving deeper, the session is prepared like that. We had a similar session kicking off with our team member, John Mortimer, about a month ago, which was about his methodology, which is the Vanguard method. So you may want to look at the recording if you haven't done that. And if yourself feel inspired by the way and the content that Al is going to share, please reach out, let us know, because maybe you would like to present here as well, just in the way that Al does. So enjoy the session. I hand it over to Al. Al is going to introduce himself, and we're going to use the PowerPoint slides that Al is going to share. Um, for your questions, which are very welcome, we suggest you share them first in writing in the chat so that we can see them. And then we might, based on how comfortable Al feels with the questions, we might address them then on the spot once he can breathe for a moment. Otherwise, we will try make sure and moderate that more towards the end so that we can have a conversation there. And if we miss the question, then please remind us so that we don't forget. All right. Good. Let's get going. Al, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Bernd. Great intro. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me, SI Organizations, Bernd, Tripura, and Joss as well. It seems quite appropriate. The SI Innovation Conference last summer. I made some brilliant connections with people here in London, which then led on to some great relationships. And yeah, so just paying a bit back in my view, and if we can have a bit of a conversation and feedback in this session, that's what I'm after. I'm not really keen on lecturing at you for an hour and a half. So I've structured it with a few breaks in between for us to chat about some of the content. Some of it can be a bit dense, so I've tried to make it as light as possible. So a little bit about me. So I've been involved in strategy and transformation in kind of its broadest sense since 2011. Before that, I was mechanical engineering background, so turbochargers, bionic hands, that sort of thing. Even in that life, I found I gravitated much more towards the organization, the social structures, the kind of hidden dynamics of people, rather than the products themselves. As fun as it is going through kind of broken parts of a turbocharger in France in winter, it's a lot more that social side that I'm interested in. So that's why I kind of shifted into consulting. Started with kind of traditional strategy consulting, your Accentures of the world, done some time in-house with BT. So then run my own business, my own kind of high growth business in South America, which was a lot of fun, a lot of learning. I had other roles in-house in kind of built environment, that sort of thing. In the last 3 years, to Bernd's point, I've been independent. So here in London, working with clients, predominantly built environment. So kind of construction industry, infrastructure, that type of conversation. So I'll touch on it in more detail when we get into the slides, but great to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of busy days. As Ben said, we'll kind of chuck questions in the chat. I'm going to move it over to the screen so as I can keep an eye on it as we go. But also feel free to take yourself off mute and just kind of talk to me if there's something you're not clear on, there's something you want clarification on, then just kind of jump in and let's treat it like that. Okay, I will shift you over here and we'll jump into the slides. So hopefully you can all see that now. Can I have a nod? If you can, perfect. Excellent. Okay, so in terms of kind of what we'll cover, so I'll give you a kind of just quick introduction beyond what I've talked to already. Talk about the case study first and foremost. I think that's why we're here, just to bring these things to life. So what does it mean in practice? What's the problem we're actually trying to solve? Talk a wee bit about how systems thinking can help, in my opinion. Such a broad term. So I'll give you kind of my view on that. The viable system model, background to it. I will give you my understanding. There are others who will go into a lot more detail. So I'd say I'm fairly comfortable with it, but I'm absolutely no expert. So that there are others in the field who are kind of gone down into great depths. It's got a long track record, lots and lots of different interesting things to read about. So I'll point you to some of those, and then we'll apply it to the case study. And it'd be great to get your feedback at the end. So quick introduction to me beyond what I've said, just a quick recap, kind of three hats really. So main hat, family hat, live in London, family of four, including our wee sausage dog, Chili. Originally from Scotland, some of you may have picked that up, others may not. If you thought it was Irish, I definitely won't be offended, don't worry. Independent consulting is the second hat. So broadly, strategy and transformation. What does that mean? Specifically for me, it tends to be around operating model design. So how does the business exchange value with customers, with the world? What is that value exchange? Organizational resilience, increasingly part of my work and kind of grounded in process transformation work. I'm also just finishing my PhD, which is a massive relief because it's been 5 years part-time. It was a pretty wild idea to start that alongside a job 5 years ago. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but at the same time, I'm also quite happy it's coming to an end. Read into that what you will. That gave me a real depth in things like participatory system dynamics, problem structuring. The work was directly with a UK regulator developing strategy in the construction sector. So how do you build a more resilient, a safer built environment where occupants are safer? So that was a big focus of my work. So that's where we are there. So just quickly on the academic hat and the consulting hat, often you'll just get chucked into one of the two buckets. Even people I've known for a long time, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, well you're an academic now," or will you do strategy and transformation? I don't want to know about the kind of academic stuff. For me, it's the combination is the whole point. It's kind of, and I have lots of friends who sit in both worlds. Kind of that is where there's real value, in my opinion, moving between the two. So just quickly on my approach, by kind of these three things are what I always come back to, right? Be pragmatic, be empathetic, and have something grounded in some sort of theory or some sort of learning from other case studies, other people way smarter than I am. But those are the three things that I always kind of gravitate back to, and it's not particularly profound after having just maybe done a PhD and I maybe expected something different myself, but this is kind of it's kind of human business, right? We're kind of building trust, trying to shift systems, and that requires a lot of social like discussion. And these are the three things that are most important to me anyway in my work. So where have I changed? I've touched on quite a few of those already in the introduction, so I won't labor it. What we're going to talk about today is an organization there called Raw Charging. So they're an electric vehicle infrastructure organization in the UK, private equity backed, growing very quickly, doing very well. The case study is from 2022, so kind of slightly different picture, very different picture to where they are today. I've changed a couple of details just for obvious reasons, but by and large, it's true to the case itself. So, case study context. We're in the UK. We're looking at net zero strategy, looking at EV infrastructure. So, how do you charge a growing number of EV cars? Raw charging had PE backed to grow, to put more charge points in. The pictures there bring it to life, right? So, if I was to say they're primarily B2B, they are installing chargers with hotels, with pubs, with national parks. So that's the type of installation they're working with clients on. Few bottlenecks as any growing business has. So customer onboarding, installation scheduling, coordination with third-party providers. The challenge for me wasn't just capacity, it was incredibly complex. You've got this growing business in this growing industry that has so many different types of technology. I mean, the amount of plugs to go into cars, we're not at a consistent level of technology which is uniform across the industry. So it's quite fragmented. So making head nor tail of what was going on was actually quite challenging. So just quickly on what do you do in that scenario? So I'm engaged with that business. So I'm working with the CFO directly, and the ask is, can you come and help? So kind of I was a year or two into the PhD at this point. And up to that point in my career, I'd done a lot of Lean Six Sigma, a lot of human-centered design. I'd just jumped down this systems thinking rabbit hole. I must admit, I'd gone like a year fairly heavily into system dynamics modeling, kind of causal diagrams, participatory methods. Um, and I remember sitting down with him, and within about 30 seconds in my head, I was like, oh, it's not a system dynamics problem. I was quite excited. I'm not normally that person that's kind of method first. I'm quite method agnostic. But I was looking forward to applying system dynamics or at least causal loops in this format. And I'm sure I could have, but it didn't feel like the right fit. So the first kind of checkpoint for me was what's the best approach given this context? And luckily I had created a kind of one pager, which I was using to navigate the complex systems thinking landscape at that point. So I think we'll run through that one pager and then I'll stop and then we'll just kind of see if there's any comments or questions at that point before we then dive into the VSM in more detail. So this is a one pager based on Mike Jackson's work, which John actually touched on in the last session as well. So the question at the top is how can systems thinking help? I'm assuming you can see that top bar on my screen. It's totally blacked out. With that you can. Okay, perfect. So kind of Mike's work has been quite informative for me. So critical systems thinking and management of complexity, it's referenced in the bottom there. So that his book really looks at, what are the different ways to look at an organization through different lenses. So whether you're viewing the organization as a machine or an organism or political, environmental, or interrelationships. The work's based on kind of Morgan's organizational metaphors. And that's really helpful just to kind of ground yourself in terms of where are a lot of the different issues within the organization if we think about it through these different lenses. Where I find it most helpful, particularly in client conversations, is then kind of what typical outcome are we looking to achieve? So are we looking to increase efficiency or effectiveness in the system? Or is it over on the right-hand side and we want to uncover leverage points for change in a system? You might want to do combinations of these things or kind of what is the outcome you're trying to drive?
Yeah, we also have they don't need to have been signed up with us to receive these either, so they'll get kind of an email. So, but yeah, you're
Can't
right.
tell who that is. Perfect. Okay, I think we're good. I thought I was getting heckled already. I was like, that's fast. We've not even got into the VSM yet. So just coming back to what outcome are you trying to achieve? And then how does that relate to different systems thinking approaches? And what Mike's done in the book is say kind of what were the origins of some of these approaches? So, for example, John in the previous talk talked about the Vanguard method in the bottom left here. Typically, that'll be around efficiency and effectiveness, and it will tend to view the organization from a machine perspective. So that's kind of the kind of one way of looking at it. A lot of my work is around system dynamics on the right-hand side, and that tends to focus on leverage points for change within a system. If you want to look at maybe increasing mutual understanding, which can be really helpful for strategy, interactive planning, Akos interactive planning might be a route that you go down. This isn't to say that these approaches can't be used for interchangeable outcomes that you're after. The point was more just giving a bit of a container to say all of these approaches exist. They can be used for different outcomes that you're trying to drive. And for me, honestly, this space there was just so much. You can dive into system dynamics for 5, 10, 20 years, right? And you can make a career in just one of these boxes. Or you can aim to have an appreciation of all of these different approaches, depending on how you want to engage in your practice, how you want to solve problems, what interests you. Do you like causal diagrams and modeling? Does problem structuring methods and soft system methodology really talk to you and help you in what you do day to day? So for me, it was about gaining an appreciation of what exists. I'd say kind of maybe 4 or 5 of those I'm fairly comfortable working with, whereas some of the others I haven't kind of engaged with at all. So I'm not sure anyone could be an expert in all of them, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong if somebody were to be. So that kind of reviewing that and going back on what I understood around systems approaches, the kind of viable system model jumped out at me. So we had a high growth organization, complex environment, very, very adaptive, changeable market, regulation, different policy having big impacts on EV market itself with a high relationship to the infrastructure. Infrastructure in the UK, if you live in the UK, one was quite fraught with investment decisions. So it felt like the right one to pick. And that's what we went with. I'll pause at that point and just see if there's any questions up to there.
People are shy, so may I go first? Can you elaborate? And after me, it's gonna be Hans. Can you elaborate, Al, with the example that you introduced from the charging points, and your brain was going all system dynamics and doing causal loops, and then you realize something. Maybe you can show that with this graphic.
Yeah, so I think it would have been nice, but I think that was maybe the kind of purist in me thinking, taking a particular tool to solve an unknown problem, from using a system dynamics point of view. The outcome we were trying to achieve was resilience and viability. It's got a high growth business, which is it's got product market fit, but at the same time, it's trying to expand that incredibly quickly in a changeable market. So viability and resilience seemed like the most important outcome that we were trying to achieve. And it would have been very easy to have focused on efficiency or effectiveness, which was also a consideration. But I think for me, the kind of the decision-making process was around what's the most important outcome that we're looking to achieve with this business. And that's why I ended up with the VSM. Not to say you couldn't have used a different method and it worked out better. That was just the discussion that I was having with the client, right? And I don't want to make out as if, you know, I'm sat there with some kind of black box deciding what should and shouldn't happen. This is a co-created conversation around how do we solve this problem together. And I think that's a really important point to bring out. It's not a kind of every hero wears capes situation, right? It's discussion, it's a dialogue. How do we solve this together? And then you move it forward from there.
Thank you,
Does that
Al.
help, Bernd? Cool.
Thank you, Al.
No worries.
Over to you, Hans.
Hi, Al. I come from the architectural, construction, workplace, facilities management, built
Awesome.
asset sector. And, you know, I've been, you know, participating with these courses with Josh over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And I've done it because I've moved into gamification of the built asset environment because of digital twins. And what I've discovered is that, and you'll appreciate it, is that my industry or the industry is a siloed kind of sector, and you know, transitioning, they operate with what I call a reactive-based approach to everything.
Yeah.
And with my learnings and lessons so far, what I've discovered that this is a huge area. And so my question to you really is, I have a situation where I've been invited to support with a smart city initiative in Sweden and in Denmark. And part of it is around them wanting to use digital twin technology. Now, what I was looking for before this call was how would I approach the right type of model to allow me to get this kind of like holistic view, depending upon what the circumstances were when I'm thinking at it at city level.
Yeah. So good that we're in the same industry. That definitely resonated. I know it well. The mention of silos definitely resonates. So I mean, the good thing about the viable system model is that it is fractal.
Okay.
And we'll touch on that in a bit more
Yeah.
detail. But I think if you are talking city level, then viability and resilience increasingly in today's world is up there with some of the most important outcomes you're trying to achieve.
And I was going to say, because the thing is for me, it's not just about the kind of like the outside space that everybody thinks of. When we talk about the environment and sustainability, I'm also having to consider, because of my facilities management background, the indoor environment and the relationship between the indoor environment usage and change and everything which is happening around dynamic kind of like automation of indoor spaces, and how it reflects, but having one universal model that ties the two together and enables you to take all parties on this journey, even though it's going to be a multi-generational set of stakeholders.
Yeah. And I guess we'll touch on it now I mean, Stafford Beer applied this to a country scale. So I think that kind of Brain of the Farm second edition might be where I would point you to first of all, which has got some of the learning from the Chile experiment.
That'd be really appreciated.
But we'll cover that just now, and then let's circle back at the end of the call. Perfect. I will crack on if that's all right, folks. Just based on time. Thank you for those. So the case study, let's just kind of recap where we are. So net zero strategy, private equity, scale up, EV, customer onboarding, installation, coordination. So we're talking viable system model. 3 reasons why I use the viable system model before we jump into the detail. Just kind of top level, why I find it really useful. The first is increasing strategic alignment and reducing risk. So a lot of the kind of the research that I've done has looked at structure. So in system dynamics, structure is said to drive behavior. And a lot of the time, strategy and structure have this sort of association, or often that tends to be the connotation. So if you take the example of the strategy offsite in a corporate, go away and develop a magical strategy, come back, turn it into an implementation plan, cascade of metrics through the organization. You might have a target operating model piece of work to then follow on and shift the structure to deliver the strategy. The reason the VSM is so helpful is it helps you identify that it's actually a reciprocal relationship. And Patrick probably said it best in the fractal organization. So the strategic options open to an organization are limited by the information that's fed into the strategic decision-making process. Those structures kind of limit what you see and what you don't see, where you pay attention, what you think is important, and therefore that's the way in which you build your strategy. If I give a really trite example, just to bring it to life a little bit, my wife went away last weekend on a long weekend, and we booked the hotel through points, joint account, and I booked it, and I got an email telling me from the hotel that she wasn't allowed to check in because it was under my name. They said, you need to phone these 3 phone numbers in the UK, and you need to change it to her name. So I called all 3 phone numbers. None of them worked. Getting a little bit annoyed by this point, so I emailed them back, and they said, oh, you need to email customer service. Okay, email customer service. Customer service a day later emailed me back and said, I'm sorry, but we can't do this via email. You have to phone one of these 3 numbers. I'm getting pretty frustrated at this point. And the point for highlighting that is they have me getting very frustrated and unhappy, but their structure has no way of knowing that I'm unhappy. They're not hearing this. They can't see this until somebody did on the 4th phone number that I found. But the point is that there is a lot of activity going on outside, and you only have a partial view of the world. You can only have a partial view. So that relationship is the VSM helps a lot. The second is to stop the pendulum and the design for environmental fit. So what I mean by that, so this balance between autonomy and cohesion. So on the left-hand side, there's often a pull for autonomy. So we need to increase our spending limits. I have to get every deal approved and it takes ages. We're over here. Or cohesion. We need to be more aligned. Different departments are giving customers mixed messages. This tension has kind of, I don't know, it's one that very, very much kind of brings up a lot of feeling for me now. The reason being, like, how many times might you have been in an organization where a department was divided into 3 through an operating model change to better serve customers, only for 2 years later to be brought back together into what it was before? And this dynamic can play out over years, become a bit of a parody, because this is quite an emotional thing for individuals in organizations, or can be. This kind of illusion of control and needing to know what's going on versus autonomy and giving people and departments, teams license to innovate and ownership to adapt to their environment. The VSM helps because it prevents the navel gazing. It becomes around structural fit with the environment. So how are you matching variety with parts of the organization to the environment? What is that fit? So it becomes more of a conversation of balance rather than either or. And I think there's a lot that could be learned for different organizations by looking at it through this lens. The last one, how you improve, how you manage change. So I tend to talk about whether you work in the business or on the business, or typically how you tend to think, how you like to work, your preference. Some people can do both. A lot of people have a bias towards one or the other. So whether you're having conversations around another transformation workshop, are you kidding? I've got customer orders to deal with. Or if you're the other side, this is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. We need to change the process. The VSM, again, it gives you a way to recognize that both are equally as important. And it's again about balance. And I kind of highlighted in gray there mosaic transformation, because it gives you a different language to talk about transformation, which instead of a large scale organizational transformation where you might have something like hearts and minds, and you might have change management, and you might have people going through the change curve, kind of as an organization-wide change. The VSM is going to kind of push you a lot more towards precise sequenced interventions where you can create structural redundancy within the organization. And then you can do it in a particular order, so as it's managed and it's kind of a natural evolution. So they're the three things for me that kind of, when I fell down the rabbit hole, I was like, oh, this is kind of hitting those notes, which have been things that they've been uncomfortable, and I've not really known why they've been uncomfortable or how to do it differently. And they've helped me in that way. So we'll whiz through the origins, because there are other videos and other people who do a way better job than me. And then we'll get to the case study. So Stafford Beer from Putney, just down the road from me. I'm in Twickenham, so literally a few stops down the road. Brilliant guy, very smart, quite eccentric by the sounds of things. I think three main books. There are many. The Brain of the Firm focused a lot on the kind of neural system, so individuals, neurophysiology. There are 5 systems from that perspective, which make a system, us as individuals, viable, adaptable, how we can grow, change, kind of live in this world and thrive. And that one, the second edition, also has some of the results from the Chilean experiment, as I've called it, where Stafford Beer worked with the government there to try and apply the viable system model at the scale of a government, which is another great rabbit hole to fall down. The second, well, from my perspective, second book. So if the first one, The Brain of the Firm, was looking at neurophysiology and kind of going in and saying kind of what are the 5 systems from that perspective, the Heart of the Enterprise takes more of a cybernetic first principles approach and saying, does that stack up from looking at it from a completely different perspective? And then my favorite, because I'm quite basic, dare I say it, like when you're in practice and you want to apply these things, you want something which is written in as kind of easy to understand way, and the diagnosing the system is very helpful for applying that. So that's Stafford Beer, very, very worth a read. A viable system, so what is it? So it's a system that survives, it coheres, it's balanced, it can adapt, and it becomes more and more potent in its environment. So I think that often viability and resilience are used interchangeably. And resilience from an organizational perspective, typically in my experience anyway, has a bit of a negative connotation around risk management and audit. And it's kind of managing downside and how do you respond to setbacks. And there is an element of that, of course, but it's also about how do you adapt and thrive in a changing environment. So it's much more about fit. And when a strategic window opens, are you able to capitalize on that? What resources do you have available to then capitalize on that, as much as it is about how do you respond to something which is kind of a threat to the organization? So again, that kind of changed my bias around what I understood when I heard terms like viable, and that sort of thing. So 2 building blocks of the VSM, and I promise we'll get into the VSM proper. So the first one is requisite variety, and the second one is what fractal is. So requisite variety, it's a kind of fundamental law of organizational cybernetics. So a system can only survive or be effective if it is capable of responding to the variety present in its environment. So variety absorbs variety in a kind of very basic manner. So what does that mean from a management perspective? My interpretation, and the reason I have a jigsaw little image there, is because you're talking about fit. So the variety inside the organization, the capacity you have, the capability you have, needs to match with the environment that you're trying to have a value exchange with. So from a capacity capability perspective, what is that fit? Do the jigsaw pieces go together, or do they not? And is that something that you can rectify? Okay, fractal. So fractal is a pattern that repeats. The reason I have a Lego block there is this professor, Professor Roberts, he's in Auckland as well, I think. He builds these fractal Lego models for his kids. I think I'm probably the same sort of parent who would do something similar. So I just love it. I think that's really cool. And you can see the white triangle is a smaller version of the entire shape, right? That's the idea of a fractal. So your team structure, the way one team works, how they meet, plan, deliver, is a smaller version of the department, is a smaller version of the organization. There are much more artistic ways of showing this with trees and leaves and other shapes, but the Lego pyramids for me is the one that does it. Okay, so kind of hold on to those two. So VSM, let's jump in. The viable system model can often look like this. Most people have this reaction, which I've seen a couple of you do. So I don't blame you. I guess I look at it, right, and like just from a mechanical engineering point of view, it looks a bit like a schematic. So I look at it and I'm like, oh, what's that? Like, I would like to learn about that, but through experience, I've learned that not everyone thinks so or sees it in that way, and it will have tissue rejection with some people. And Macaulay is not happy at all there. So let's do it a different way. What does it actually help you with? Let's come back to this. So Adam Thompson is a consultant in Australia. Done some great videos on this, and I'm just going to read this because he's this is what the viable system model will help you with. So helps you to coordinate, optimize allocation of resources, check things that are happening. You might have to have a think about what you might need to be different in the future. Think about why you're bothering in the first place, and make sure information is getting to where it needs to be. So again, we've gone from a kind of really complex diagram to something which kind of sounds quite intuitive and common sense. So let's run through it. So we have the environment, and we have operations, and we have management. That's it at a basic level. So they're the components. Within operations, you'll typically have different operations that are connected through a value chain. They'll each have some sort of value exchange with the environment. So system one is that operations. So the primary activities of an organization. So they tend to be, the complexity within those tends to be kind of around technology, geography, customers, or time tend to be the kind of complexity drivers. So if you think about take a car manufacturer, for example, so kind of my earlier days, you'd be looking at kind of your supply chain, you'd be looking at your actual manufacturing, assembly, and then you'd be looking at kind of shipping. You'd have some sales in there as well. There'd be some design teams, and it's not going to be a complete linear flow, but there's going to be a kind of value of exchange for primary activities. There's some management of individual divisions or teams, and they are having kind of connection with the environment. That's system one. System 2 is all about coordination. And the best example comes from, well, at least where I heard it from Patrick's book as well, is just around the power of coordination is from a timetable in a school. So if you had 1,000 kids in a school with no timetable, knowing who needed to be where when, then you would have absolute chaos. So kind of a bit deeper on that, kind of what schedules exist, what's the shared language? So for me, I always come back to, are we talking about the same thing but using different language between different departments? Often, yes. What are the communication channels? What are some of the delays in the communication channels? And how well are we coordinating those different activities? Has a huge impact on the organization. Delivery or delivery management. So this is a lot around performance reporting and resource bargaining. So I don't know how many of you have worked in large corporates, but my experience of the budgeting cycle, as it's kind of normally described, is you create a set of targets. They can be top down or bottom up. Top down is kind of cascaded, and they're kind of shared. Typically, there'll be a bottom up setting from the teams where they say, like, this is what I need, this is what I'll deliver. It'll go up, and then top down will double those, or will hit something completely different. The art of the conversation in the viable system model is that dialogue. So it's much like if you were to go away for a weekend with friends and you were all at a cottage, say in the countryside, you divide up who's doing what, who's getting the food, who's organizing activities maybe, who was driving where. There would be a conversation and an exchange. Some people would be spending money, others time to deliver an agreed outcome. So it's much more that kind of that dialogue and that conversation, which is important and which is different to how it's often viewed within kind of organizations. Performance reporting, again, the coordination information needs to be clear to then get an accurate view of what's going on within the organization. So system 3 has a system 3 star, which is around monitoring. Kind of those of you that have went into the Lean Six Sigma world, you would have a kind of a go look see type mentality where you would actually go and look at operations and understand what's happening. And the important thing is that that's not being done by the kind of first line ops management in red. It's being done by kind of one level up. So it might be a director or senior manager is actually engaging deeply in the conversation around what's happening. And that's a sporadic conversation. It's not a regular check-in and kind of, really controlling what's happening. And it's also not what tends to happen, which is you have an audit function which publishes who it's going to audit for the next year in a very clear process, so that people can organize and tidy and get prepped for the audit. This is more kind of it's not planned, or at least not shared with the ops teams, and it has to be done in the right manner. So it's a conversation, it's a shared learning. It's a genuine interest in what's happening within the operations. So as the kind of delivery and the management function has a level of confidence and assurance, and I often use the word assurance when I'm talking about System 3, that you know that what is said to be happening from the reporting is actually happening. So System 4 is a lot about strategic risk. Some innovation, it does different activities, kind of organizational change, and looking out into the future. So a lot of my work sits here from a kind of research perspective. So working with a regulator around the future of a sector, saying kind of what are different perspectives around where they ought to intervene in the system in the future. It's looking at strategic risk. Innovation in there as well. That's not saying innovation just happens in one place. It's thinking of what is the approach, the strategy for innovation within the organization. How does the autonomy within different units enable them to innovate? And organizational change. So the point I touched on right at the start, which was around kind of how are you balancing organizational change and actually delivery. So this gives you a language to separate those things, because you're saying, well, look, it needs to happen, but it needs to be in balance. And how is it connected? But kind of what are those connections between the different activities? And then the final point, final system, sorry, is policy. So governance, which kind of is an overused term these days. So this is a lot around how are you steering the organization? What's the identity of the organization? Again, a lot of my work sits here around perceptions of boundaries. So boundary and identity are so intimately intertwined. If one country invades another, it is a challenge on their identity of who they are. The same with you as a person, right? Your boundary is your skin, and that is your identity. So they're very tightly linked. And at that level, you're thinking about the environmental fit. So how do you adapt to your environment? And just final thing before I pause for breath and let you kind of throw any questions you might have at me. These aren't kind of departments in themselves. It's more saying what are the activities that from a viable system perspective ought to be going on at some level, some way. Some are maybe happening more than others. I'm a business of one. That's the easiest way for me to get my head around it. I should be doing all of these activities. So that helps me understand what this is. So I should be looking at kind of what is my kind of core delivery process to deliver value for clients. So how is that being coordinated? Very poorly in my experience. But they're kind of what's the reporting? So whether that's looking at finances from my budgeting, or kind of feedback from clients, what's the kind of future looking? So how are you looking at kind of strategic risk, innovation around AI changes to that type of industry, and then kind of from an identity point of view, kind of what are you looking to kind of achieve? What sort of outcomes? I will pause at that point and see if there's any questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Very simple. So are you saying that this viable system is made up of 5 subsystems as part of these categories, or are there others that sit outside of it that can influence it?
So saying there are 5 systems that make up a viable system, or almost kind of how I phrased it at the top are around the requirements for a viable system. So the activities that you would expect to see going on. There will be other things going on in the environment, of course, but if you think about it as an organism, you would kind of internal to that, you'd expect to see these kind of 5 communication channels as much as actual activities. So the links are just as important, and the communication flows are just as important as the actual activities themselves.
Yeah, that's fine. So this acts like the kind of core framework for getting, I use the term, under the hood of whatever the organization is striving to achieve, whatever that might look like.
Yeah. And I would building on that, I would say yes, can be viewed as the anatomy of the system and at different fractal levels.
Brilliant.
I think Beatrice is here.
Beatrice, do you want to shoot with your question?
So my question is about the boundary of the system, and you mentioned like the skin as being a good example. I'm working in a public policy context about health systems and particular primary care, where the boundaries are very fuzzy, and some people are boundary spanners, and they are half in 1 foot in primary care, 1 foot in secondary care. Some of course are not even doctors or nurses or carers at all. And so my question is, to what extent is this type of model appropriate for that type of system where the boundaries are really not that clear? And you certainly can't imagine that you can set it up with the system 1, 2, 3, 4 and all of this, and then expect that everybody else is going to do the same. For example, a primary care system is made up of lots of other systems, and those other systems is not at all fractal. That's my question.
Yeah, great question. And but fuzzy boundaries are, make it very, very difficult. So yeah, a couple of things sprung to mind there. So there is the fractal nature of the VSM, but if different people have different perspectives on the boundaries, then that kind of, you're in a very difficult situation. So I think that very important to define what the boundaries of the work are first. So I would tend to lead most of my work with critical systems heuristics to begin with, to kind of go through I don't know if you've used critical systems heuristics before. So there's 12 questions that help you with boundaries, specifically. So I find that very helpful. There's a video that I can send a link to. So it's just kind of give you a summary of what those are. And just running through that kind of collaboratively with different stakeholders, it'll shine a light on the different perspectives on who sees boundaries in different places. And that activity in itself can be very formative to then set up any kind of VSM work.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll have a look at that.
No worries. Thank you.
More questions?
I think I'll crack on, Bernd, if that's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just in the interest of everyone's time and actually getting to the part that we said we would get to.
Yep.
So could you give me access to share, please, Bernd? Is that all right?
That's gonna be Tripura.
There we go. Okay, so we have viable system model, which we've run through. Case study. Look, timing wise, I'm going to try and kind of shift through this in 10 minutes to bring this to life. So as we have a good 20 minutes for any discussion afterwards. Bernd, just to flag, I've gone to one screen because I keep looking over there. So if there are any questions in the chat or anything, please give me a shout. So if we take the case study, so we're working EV infrastructure, and my work started with sales. So the client problem was around kind of miscommunication in sales, onboarding, delays in onboarding. So we did a lot of work at that level, so at that fractal level. We did a similar map to this before moving up to the size of the organization. I'm just going to go through it at this level, otherwise we would be here all day. So we looked at sales, we looked at how that was managed, how they engaged with partners, how they engaged with customers, what that customer experience was like. Their core activities were sales deployment of these, so installing these chargers in the ground, connecting them up to electricity. You've got AC, you've got DC, you've got fast charging, slow charging related to that. And then you've got in-life management. So you're managing this network of different chargers across the country. So again, they look like this, just to help bring it to life. Each of these have interactions with the environment. So for example, there are multiple interactions, but the first activity I'm doing is saying kind of what is that stakeholder list? Who do they interact with? Is it sales partners? For deployment, it's actually, suppliers who they partner with in different parts of the country to install these. What's the performance of the network? Well, it's a third-party technology platform that's actually sending in information. So there's quite a lot of complexity going on within this process. Remember, the complexity drivers for the primary activities typically tend to focus on technology, geography, customers, and time. So what we found was that installing EV chargers, the data was stored against sites. So it was leading to a high degree of complexity in the number of handovers. So that was geography. It was the driver of complexity. So you've got maybe hundreds, thousands of sites, and each one of those is being managed at that level. From a coordination point of view, that high degree of complexity is kind of driving through the organization. So a high number of options that need to be scheduled. And working with third-party providers to schedule those, you can see how you get up to a times 10 to the power of number of options that could be coordinated on any one day, a week, or a month. From a delivery perspective, the reporting cycles were monthly, so it was quite tight. So again, private equity tends to be a lot tighter cycles than your larger corporates. Primarily financial and very strong resource bargaining. You've got, because it was a growing organization, reasonably small headcount, there was quite regular resource bargaining and conversations, quite different to the more hierarchical that you might have in larger organizations and more distant in space and time, right? If you have different units in different geographies or different parts of the country. This is one office, much easier to have those conversations and not have obstacles that kind of cause delays and miscommunication between them. Monitoring, very ad hoc, happened just through people rolling up their sleeves. I think private equity is an interesting model because the monitoring, the next level up, happens quite organically with them actually going and seeing how their portfolio companies are doing. But at this level, it was quite ad hoc. From a development point of view, strategic risk was very tightly managed between the company and the investor. There was a lot of forward looking. There was a lot of engagement with policymakers, with different forums, and a recognition that this industry was changing rapidly and growing. So it's kind of my experience tends to be that the larger, the easier it is within an organization to enable gaze, to look at yourself, to forget that there's a world and customers out there. Whereas with a smaller organization, they were kind of constantly looking out and seeing what was happening, and kind of adapting to that. And from a clarity of purpose and identity point of view, it was very clear. There's an investment plan, growth targets in quite an expanding market. So the complexity driver was really at that primary activity level, and the matching with what was going on. And one way to change that, so how we looked at it and how we changed it, was to say, okay, from a primary activities point of view, what's the relationship between these different ways of looking? And some of you might recognize something like this from a data hierarchy type conversation. So what's the kind of primary unit of conversation that we're having? So the current state was a site conversation split by geography. That drove loads of complexity because you're all talking about this site or that site or this site or that site. And each of those has a different charger type split by technology. And the technology is not consolidated yet. So you have these kind of fast, slow, AC, DC, different charger types coming onto the market. And then beneath that, you have different kind of exchanges with customers. So you have a one-off sale of a charger, or you have predominantly a managed service where you install it for them, you lease it, and that's split by customer. And you have an installation. Now, if you're the customer, your experience in this setup can be very disjointed because if it's very hard then for the organization to get a single view of one customer and their sites and their technology. because it is just not structured that way. So in VSM language, you would kind of look to attenuate that and kind of shift how you're matching the complexity within the environment. So the alternative way of doing that is to talk about the kind of engagements that you have with the customer first, so managed or one-off. They're very different time horizons. So one is a sale of a thing, and that's it. And that actually caused quite a lot of complexity within the overall operation when it was a small volume of things. To kind of split that out, and you talk about the managed service with a customer. So let's talk about this particular hotel group. What charger types do they have or do they want? What do their customers want? And then what sites do they have? So split by geography, and then the actual installation. What does that plan look like to install? There's no right or wrong way to do this. Charger type and sites could be the other way around. It all depends about how you want to kind of drive the flow of activity through the organization. And I think the conversation is the most important part at this level. So we didn't have this type of image, but we had kind of organizational images up to then talk through the different options and the different types of complexity that would drive. So in this setup, it drove a reduction in complexity and almost a streamline of activity by focusing on different drivers of complexity. Kind of the outcomes, improve customer experience, because you're talking about the customer as the unit at the front end. Enable structured end-to-end data flow, help with alignment. Visibility and decision making is always my main focus. So are we getting the right information to the right people at the right time to inform strategy? In this case, that helped massively, and could it help them grow? I actually went back to Nick last week, who's the CFO, and asked him to write down what his kind of takeaway was. I'm not going to read it at you, but the things that I thought were quite resonant with the VSM was that it helped rationalize the processes or how they thought about the processes, and it helped with actually de-risking the systems to future-proof the business. So we took the revision and we built that into a kind of RFP for a data strategy, for them to then move forward with that, and actually embed thinking differently about that hierarchy within their actual data structure, which the VSM is great with thinking about those communication channels within different activities. Kind of final thing for me, and I will stop, just on a one-pager on if I wanted to learn about the VSM in the next month, what would I do? I would read Patrick's book, so the Fractal Organization. From a kind of slightly more academic point of view, the viable system model in the Journal of Systems Thinking. So Angela Espinosa and others wrote this paper rather, which has some amazing, is a very good article in itself, but it has some amazing references right up front. So there's some real seminal work that you can get off the back of this one paper by just following some of those references. So, I mean, you could be there for 12 months, I think. But if I was just within this kind of ethos of what can you take away for the next month if you want to learn about it, the Metamorphom conference is actually tomorrow in the UK. It's tomorrow and Friday. So that is all about the VSM. So we're going to share this deck, and the link to each of these pages is in each of these images. So then you can just click the image, right, and you can go to each of these. So the conference is tomorrow and Friday. They have some online participation through Zoom, and also the SIO network. So that has a conference the 3rd and 4th of September in the UK. Sorry, this is very UK centric. But I'm sure some of that will be online, hopefully. But as a platform, SIO in the middle there at the bottom has videos, it has regular events in different countries virtually, where you can talk with other practitioners and kind of exchange stories or listen to presentations, which is incredibly helpful. And I would watch these 3 videos. So 2 are by Adam Thompson. The first one is 2 minutes long, and I've sent it to a client before and said, please watch this. You maybe shouldn't do that, but he's a good friend. But he's kind of he gives a great 2-minute overview of the VSM. He also does, as part of I can't remember the name, Systems at Play. Sorry, both of those videos are from Systems at Play as the kind of the organizer. So Adam does more of a practitioner's view of the viable system model, whereas Jose does a lot more in-depth theory behind it, background, way better than I could, right? So if this is like has caught your attention in terms of some of these things, there's a lot more that you can do around quantification of resilience, actually looking at potentiality, actually putting some numbers to some of this, which appeals to a lot of organizations as well. So I would kind of recommend as a starting point, watch those and kind of see how it takes you and enjoy. So thank you. I'll pause there and we've got 15 minutes for a chat, hopefully. Apologies for overrunning.
Very well. Thank you, Al.
If I can get my mouse over it. There we go.
Sarah may go first.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you very much. That was really interesting and helpful to kind of refresh my memory. I am part of SIO actually, so I can vouch
Awesome.
that they're a really friendly group and good to be part of. And I think they've actually got an open UK thing on the 14th of July. My question was actually, I'm just working at the moment with an organisation that is actually a collective of other organisations. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts really on if the subsystems are not necessarily functioning in what you'd be classing as a viable way, as long as they are contributing whatever they need to the wider system, would you say that it's still possible to establish a viable system using the VSM at a greater collective level? I just wanted to hear
Tricky.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah. It would depend on the context for me, really. In terms of depth, so I would typically map kind of one level at VSM and kind of one factor level up and one down.
Yeah,
I wouldn't tend to go any further than that and just look at the relationship between those fractal levels. I'm sure it would be having some impact, and I'm sure you could do some calculations on that in terms of kind of different viability. But yeah, that might be beyond my level of capability, I'm afraid, Sarah. But
but
I'd
in
be
your
happy to
mind, if
be happy to chat
would
about it for sure.
would you say it was theoretically possible though? I suppose that was the question really. Or do all of the subsystems have to kind of fall in line?
Well, I mean, there can be organizations that have got kind of nothing happening on
Yeah,
System 4, for example, and they're still viable for a period
yeah,
of time. So yeah, I think they absolutely can. It's that the factor of time which is the challenge, and we're
yeah,
saying kind of can they stay viable over the long term? So I think they can function without some of these, or maybe they're underactive systems, or maybe not active at all. I've definitely worked with organizations that don't have a system 4, for example, or kind of not
yes,
much
yeah,
system 5. So I think they absolutely can be viable. But you're trying to say, okay, well, how do we increase the chances of being kind of not failing
yeah,
over the long term? And I think for me, that's the most important part. So yes, absolutely would be my gut reaction. They can be, but they just might have a reduced chance of survival over the long term.
yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful.
No worries. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Any other questions?
Do you have any tools that you've used that kind of help bring this all together? Because I recognize there's a lot of kind of component parts to this. And so, I'm thinking to myself, oh, right, I've got to put together spreadsheets and lovely diagrams and everything else. But is there a tool or platform that can be used for this ASM framework?
Do you know what? I actually attended I think it was maybe a Metamorphom event a few weeks back, and there was a VSM canvas that was presented, which I thought was really useful.
Okay.
So again, happy to share the links for that. I have never used it myself, but it was really interesting to understand how that was being applied. Um, the to be honest, I find the conversation most helpful to try and kind of, I guess, unfold different parts of it just in a sketch initially, and just try and have that conversation with different people in the organization. Some bits might have more detail than others. Some might just be kind of a bit of a wireframe, and you'll quickly see where the kind of priority areas are to focus. I think there's often a trap to fall into where we might think the kind of the map is the terrain, and we try and model these things to the nth degree of detail. I think it's worth remembering that you can't open up the organization and it will look like this, in my opinion. It is a way of looking at the world to help uncover different perspectives, and help increase, to Sarah's point, the kind of the viability of the organization longer term. So different practitioners will have different ways of doing it. And the two different modes I maybe didn't touch on enough. So you tend to kind of look at the VSM through a design mode if you're looking at it that way, and you're looking at an organization about how you might redesign elements of it, or a diagnostic. And this was very much the diagnostic side of things. Um, it's just a very quick way of assessing an organization. I don't know of a faster way to kind of look at the health of an organization, in my opinion, just quite quickly. So, but look, I will include the link to the canvas as well in
Right.
the slides before we share them. And alongside the critical systems heuristics link, which I think Beatrice asked about as well. So I'll add those both in.
And I suppose my final question is that are you available for partnerships?
Uh, yes, yeah. So my second child is on the way in September. So kind of that's main priority. But aside from that, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope. Everybody
Cool.
seems satisfied with the wisdom that you did share.
I think you may be stretching it when you say wisdom bound, but I will take it. The massive thank you for taking the time. I hope it was helpful. And I hope it wasn't too lectury. There's a lot of kind of building blocks, I would say. And they're really important to then actually helping understand how it can be used in practice. And like I say, I'm not by far not an expert in this area, right? I think it's a really helpful conversation starter. How do you have these discussions without it being a conversation around somebody's organization and kind of me knowing best or them knowing best, or to have this objective kind of view, but it's almost a third party view to say, well, should we look at this together? Should we take a look at this, see there's some of the building blocks, and see how that translates into your organization or doesn't? And I think that as a conversation starter is the whole point, no matter what systems approach you're using.
Mm-hmm. No, and from the comments that we saw here, I mean, you got the direct feedback from Hans. We can see Timmy nodding. But we saw, I think it was Beatrice and as well as Mike, who wrote very positive feedback into the chat, which shows that it was very well received. The audience is happy with it, and somewhere I saw that I think it was Michael who said he carried away new insights, and
Excellent.
that's one of the things we would like to hear, that it was informative, people could learn something, hopefully something new. We certainly appreciated not only the mixture of theory and practice, but also see how it's situated in the broader landscape. That really helps to have that holistic view and then be able to dive in. And for sure, we're gonna even have additional questions as we go and we review the materials. But for today, 90 minutes is really a good setting. So thank you again, Al. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciated. We are happy to invite you again if you want to share more of that wisdom. That is great. This is also an invitation to the other colleagues to come forward. Maybe you're also a fan and have some wisdom in one of these methods. We kind of separate this out into the known methods, like the viable systems one, and the others that Al did share in one of his earlier slides. We are also open if people do a more open session. We call this like the mixture of systems theories, right? When somebody has a canvas or a tiny method which cannot be exactly pointed to any of these methods that we're used to in the systems thinking space, that's also okay. We just need to have a look at that and then see how can we run an interesting, informative session around that. So we also have potential speakers lined up to share these ideas with us. Some of them are well known and they've already spoken at conferences. Hey, and otherwise, I think we are not that many people. So I think it's okay for us to reach out with some of you, have an online coffee, and then get a reflection on how helpful was this type of session? What would you like to learn more? How can we evolve our own organizations hub work and practice so that it remains relevant for you guys out there? So I think we're gonna do that as well. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Tripura.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody that was here. And we hope to see you soon again.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much,
Thank
Al.
you.
And
Welcome.
we're
Yeah.
gonna
Thank you.
share
Everyone.
recording and slides in the afterworks.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Great
Thanks a lot.
presentation.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.